Hi there. My name is Patrik Schaub from FMS Internet Service in Germany, and I'm happy to be here again this year. I hope you enjoy the user meeting, and today I'll have a presentation on the Dude. And as you see, the Dude's dead, but long live the Dude, and we'll look into that in a second. What we're going to see is a very short company introduction of ourselves. We dig into the Dude's history and see how to run the Dude on an CHR installation, go through a few basic security setups you might want to take when you're using the Dude, look into special router S features the Dude comes with, and finally customize a few statistics to give you output that the Dude will not be able to give you out of the box. So for ourselves, FMS is a value-added distributor. Next to distribution, we're doing a lot of training, consulting, and support. The company has been founded in the late 90s. By today, we're 11 people, and we're situated in the very south of Germany, just next to the Swiss and the French border. Most things that we deal with are ISP networks, wireless transmission equipment, and obviously everything that's connected to MikroTik in any way. We have a distributor table here, and if they're spread everywhere, we're here at the top left. That's a photo of last year's table. So if you feel like, drop by. You see some of the brands that we're covering. We'll be happy to talk to you. My colleague Sebastian Inacker is with me. He's our MikroTik trainer, or one of our MikroTik trainers. If you're interested in training or on-site consulting, he's the one to talk to. What you see here are a couple of photos of our training facility in Germany. If you drop by, you will also have a chance to see our MikroTik-based appliances. We'll be happy to talk to you about V+ or G-Fast with Alcatel-Lucent, show a couple of spectrum analyzers that we brought, and even demonstrate a setup on how to do power measurements on MikroTik devices with them. And we can talk about the new 2048 QAM modulation that our SAF microwaves support. A last topic I want to make you aware of, what we actually just started with, since we had more and more customers demanding that, is that we are starting to build towers for wireless ISPs. So if you need to build a tower this year or next year, also come by. We have a few samples. You can have a look at the welding and also talk to the engineers that finally make them. That's it for the advertisement. So let's go to the Dude and first have a look at the Dude's history. Actually, since it's not been taken care of for so long, I'm not sure how many people are still using it. But the Dude used to be a very, very popular network monitoring system. And it was not only popular in the MikroTik user base, but there used to be more and more customers using third-party equipment, starting to use the Dude. And there were many reasons that made it popular. I think most important one is that it is very easy to use. You don't have to fiddle around with configuration files. You can simply start and have your graphical map pretty soon. It's easy to learn. It gives you little overhead. Of course, it's free. That's probably one of the reasons people liked it. But it's more powerful than many of the paid-for solutions that have been around. Last but maybe not least, it's not a web application, but it's a real desktop software, and many people still prefer that over web applications. The sad thing was development of the Dude stopped about 5 years ago, and there have been no updates since then. Not only that the old bugs haven't been fixed, but more and more functionality started to break, especially true for connecting Router S devices, since Router S started to develop and the Dude didn't. So at the end, there was very little you still could do with it. And so we actually got more and more complaints from our customers simply saying, we'll go and look for something else. And it took them a week or two to come back and tell us, well, we don't find anything suitable having the same easy-to-use concept. So they became quite frustrated that there is a great piece of software, but it's not being taken care of anymore. So finally, a couple of weeks ago, there was this little line in the change logs. The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. And by that time, we found out people are really reading the change logs because they started to call us, to email us. It was interesting how many reactions we got within 48 hours for that little line, but nothing else. And it's true, the Dude has been back, or it's been back in development. There have already been a few release candidates, and by now it's working far better than the last beta version, number 4, 5 years ago did. Here are a few key differences that you should be aware of. On one hand, it's, well, no laser pointer. Okay. On one hand, you don't have language support anymore, so it's just English, the old version used to enable you putting translations in. That's not that big of a difference. It doesn't come with a web interface anymore, at least for now. That's also something you will be able to cope with. But the most important changes are the platforms that we support. So at the moment, it's not able, or you're not able to run the Dude as at least the Dude server as a Windows executable anymore. So you have to use Router OS as the base operating system for the new Dude versions. And that's kind of a drawback, actually. Even for the Dude platforms that we support, it's not all of them anymore. For example, you can't go with PowerPC or you can't go with MIPS BE. You have to either stick to Tile, that is, use the Cloud Core routers, or you go for an x86 version, or the cloud-hosted router, the new concept for virtual routers made by MikroTik. So since the cloud-hosted router is also something that we get a lot of questions on, and it's quite interesting in combination with the Dude, I want to show you how to get your first Dude installation running. To do so, you have to take a couple of decisions. Which platform are you going with? Tile or bare metal x86 or in virtualization? And I believe virtual environment is actually great to test, and it's also a good production environment later on for your Dude server. So we will choose a virtual installation. And once you decided about that, you still have the opportunity to use x86 or the new cloud-hosted router type of installation. And CHR will give you a couple of benefits in a virtualization in terms of performance. Most important, it comes with an 46-bit kernel, and it gives you a lot of extra drivers. For example, you don't have to use the old E1000 NICs anymore, but you can use proper network interfaces. So definitely go with the CHR if you plan to run in VMware. For my test installation, I'm going to use the VMware player, as it will be easy for you to do that on your desktop PC. And basically, there are 3 steps. You download the CHR image. It's a complete image that you will use in the VMware later. It's not NPK files as you're used to use with other platforms. Then you will install the guest operating system and finally mount these images to your disk. We'll go through that very fast. There are a few points worth to note, but most of it is a standard VMware player installation. So simply create a new virtual machine. Then you will choose to install the operating system later at the bottom left and tell it it's an other 64-bit installation or operating system that you will install. Finally, just take the settings of the hard drive. You will delete that hard drive later on anyway and finish the installation. Now you're done with it, and we go right ahead and edit the settings of the new machine, since the wizard will not give you all the options that you need, so we have to go back and edit the machine that the wizard created. Doing so, the first task will be to delete the hard disk again, and maybe set a few settings on the network interface. We'll typically run them in bridge mode, but whatever suits your test setup. So now you can, if you want to, delete the files of the disk that VMware Player did left over, and you should copy the image that you downloaded from MikroTik to the guest's working directory. Since now, and this is then one of the more important steps, you create a new hard disk manually, choose it to be IDE, and finally here's the setting that the wizard didn't give us, so we didn't use the disk we made up first. Use an existing virtual disk, what you see at the right-hand side in the red box. This will give you the opportunity to mount the image you downloaded from MikroTik. That's what you do here. You point to your local hard drive, point to the image, get it loaded. And before you go ahead now, carefully check the disk sizes. That's at least my recommendation, is this disk is only made for 128 megabytes, and that will usually be far too less, and you will limit yourself in a lot of ways. So before you first boot the machine, make sure that you expand the disk, that what you see here at figure 2, and choose a new capacity. In figure 3, I'm choosing a gigabit, for example, as we are just going to use that as the operating system disk and not as the Dude store later on. As I said, the Dude store will be on a second disk. I would recommend to do so. It will make you more flexible. So go ahead, create a second hard drive. Choose that one to be created as a new virtual disk, so no disk image this time. Give it the size that you want it to have, for example, 2 gigabytes in that setup, and finish your settings of the guest, and finally boot it. That's what you will see during boot up in your VMware CLI. And now you can go ahead and do the first connection with Winbox to your new Router OS CHR installation. And talking about the Dude, there are a couple of things worth to check. First thing is, Dude is already installed, so it's part of the CHR image. It's not necessary to get a dedicated Dude package and install that. That's not true for other platforms, but for CHR you will find the Dude pre-installed. You can also see that it's not enabled. You can see that in the box here at the left-hand side on the command line interface, issue a Dude print. You see its data directory being set to the first disk, but the Dude itself not being enabled. You will also see that the disk is not yet usable, the second one, as typically with not formatted disks. So what we do is format that disk. It's strongly recommended to go with ext3 file system for that disk. And once you formatted it, it will be available in the disk list and also available in the files list. So now we got the Dude installed, it's not running, we got the second disk prepared. So now you can go ahead and change the Dude's data directory to point to that second disk, and finally enable the Dude. When you do so, you will instantly see that the new Dude store is going to pop up in the files list at the second disk. Actually, you can change the data path later on, but at least for my tests, I did always end up with an empty new Dude store instead of the old one being copied to the new location. So if you change the Dude store's location after enabling the Dude, you will have to export and import your complete settings. So simply do it the other way around, as I suggest here, and you will be fine from the beginning. So here you are, ready to connect to your new Dude server. The client interface didn't change, at least not here. And the user interface of the Dude is also pretty much the same, just different in a few locations where it comes to configuration. Before we want to play with it for a bit, I want to show you a couple of settings that you might want to take. Basic security settings. Definitely please set up an administrator or an admin password, as you might store all your user credentials in the Dude, so it's a pretty sensitive system. You might also want to disable plain access. For my understanding, there is no need to have it enabled, so go to the main settings, the main setting dialog, and simply change the port 2210 to 0, and plain access is being disabled. Last thing that you can do within the Dude's interface itself in terms of security is to set up an ACL. That is, you can control the source network that clients will be allowed to connect from. And in this example, we change it from the default, which is 0000/0 to 10.10.00/24. So from now on, only clients coming from these source networks or this source network can connect. That's basically everything you can do within the Dude to achieve higher grade of security, and there's usually no need not to do so. And the last preparation that I want to run you through is setting up email notifications. Usually a network monitoring or management system, one of its major tasks is to send you notifications, and actually email notifications are probably mostly used for not that important messages. And also Gmail is used a lot, and there are certain steps to take care of if you're using Gmail, so we will have a look at that example. It's a bit more complicated. The Dude comes with a lot of, or not a lot of, but a few predefined types of notifications, and there are even more types available, but not yet instances are configured of those. So what you see here in the red box at the right-hand side, there's no email notification prepared. So we simply go to notifications in the main menu, use the add dialog, and choose the type of email in the figure number 2. Once you did that, you will get all the additional form fields that you see at 3, and you can do the rest of the configuration, like setting the server port to 587 and TLS mode to yes. That's what Google will want you to do. And you set up your Gmail credentials, username, password, and you can set up a recipient that those notifications should be sent to. Maybe you noticed that we are not using Gmail's SMTP service IP address here. That field is simply empty, because I would suggest to do that setting in the main settings of the Dude. If you do it here, you don't have to do it in every instance of email notifications that you're configuring later on, and you have a central place where you can do changes, so it's more convenient to have the SMTP address being set up here. After doing so, you might notify the test button at the right-hand side of the notification window, and you press it, and it will instantly show you OK at the bottom left corner, no matter if it works or not. This, from my understanding, is either buggy or it's just telling you, OK, I tried to send an email, but I have no idea if that was successful or not. If you want to get more information about if your email has really been sent, you have to move over to Winbox and add email as a log topic to your standard router OS log. And if you did so, you will see all the emails that have been sent by the Dude server as it's using the underlying router OS. For Gmail, you will probably end up with something like that. You will see the red line, which tells you auth failed, authentication failure, although you actually configured everything correctly. And if you do so, you should have a look at the text that I marked red, which just reads, please log into your web browser and then try again. Gmail is, I'm honestly not a Gmail expert at all, but I tried to dig into that, and email is introducing something called OAuth 2.0. It's, to my knowledge, a Google-made security enhancement, and everybody who doesn't support it is called to be a less secure application. So Dude definitely is a less secure application, although our encryption is properly set. So you will have to go to your Google interface and turn on access for less secure applications. Not only true for the Dude, but for a lot of other email clients too. So after you did that, hit that test button again, and you will see the log file showing you a successfully sent email for your notification. Maybe one more thing, if you don't want to have that ugly ex-Google original from header reading a bogus information, you should also change the from address in the general settings of the Dude. It doesn't really hurt, as it's going to use the correct from address anyway, but there are many reasons to change that, maybe just because you want to be correct, or maybe you don't want everybody to know you're sending that notification from Dude. So no reason to leave it as it is. So actually that's all there is I wanted to show you regarding pre-configuration. And for the rest of the presentation, I want to show you a few special features that we get in the Dude for router OS devices, and finally show you how to adapt these features to your needs and even tweak the Dude a little bit to make it what you want it to do. As I'm not talking about that anymore, I want to stress at that point that the Dude is very, very good at using third-party devices too. So we're by no means limited to router OS devices. We have an SNMP integration. We can make our own SNMP probes and use third-party devices a lot, and that's one of the advantages the Dude comes with. But for now, I want to talk about router OS devices. So first of all, you have to make your Dude aware of a certain device is a router OS device, and you do so by checking the router OS checkbox in the device's settings. And when you do so, the router OS tab will instantly appear at the above part of the window. And you can also let it know that it's a Dude server, and we'll get another tab, the Dude tab, if we do that. Let's have a short look at these tabs. They will give you direct insight in many of your router's settings and informations without actually connecting to the router itself. For example, in the upper window, you can see the wireless registration table showing you what clients are connected to it at the moment. In the screenshot below, you will see the interfaces. What interfaces do I have? How many packets, how many bytes are transferred? And you see a lot of other tabs, so this is quite convenient. And you can even do little changes here, like disabling an interface. For the Dude tab, it's almost the same. It gives you the ability to connect to a different Dude server from within your Dude connection, so you don't have to leave the client and point it to a different Dude server. You can simply use the Dude tab to see the contents of the other server. In many areas of the Dude, we will have functions or possibilities made for all types of devices, but you will usually find special features that are made for router OS. For example, here in the files area, if you go to the All tab, you will see MIB files, you will see images. All of this can be used for any type of device. But there is a special tab called Packages, which is dedicated to router OS. And that's a place where you can drag router OS installation files to and use them to centrally manage your software versions of routers later on. So what you see here is how a couple of router OS installation files are being transferred. It's the same for the devices window. Within the devices window, you can get a list or a tree view of all the devices, but there are special tabs already, or again, called router OS that only deal with router OS and that will filter the list to router OS devices, giving you additional information. Am I connected to that router? Is it a secure connection? What software version I'm running, and so on. From there in the context menu, you can choose to go to upgrade, and doing so will give you a sub-menu showing all the possible installation files already uploaded to the Dude server that you can use to upgrade or downgrade that device. And if you want to, you can also use the group function to group some devices to a named group and upgrade them all at once, so the Dude gives you the possibility of central software management. Having a look at the tools context menu is the same story. Quite a few tools like ping, traceroute, and so on that can be used with any type of device. But then again, there are a few special tools that are only working with router OS. There are a couple of tools that are meant to connect to your router, like Winbox, for example, or Terminal, or remote connection, which will also allow you to use MAC Telnet or the Dude. But more interesting are those tools that can be run from a router. And these tools are, or most of them, or actually all of them, are also available in Winbox. But some of them are far more powerful if you use them from the Dude map compared to what they can do for you within Winbox. First of them is the bandwidth test. You'll all know the bandwidth test probably, but if you run it from Winbox, you will manually have to enter the opposite IP address, you have to give username and password, and so it can be quite time-consuming to make bandwidth tests across your backbone or across your network. And within the Dude, you can simply use the drop-downs to use or select both devices and don't have to use user credentials anymore. It's the same story for Torch. Torch can be run from the Winbox directly, but when you run it from the Dude, you can select the router that you want to run Torch, and you can get different views of your network from a central location. And next to the table with information that Dude will present you in Winbox, within Dude, it will give you additional graphs that are not present in Winbox, so you can have pie and bar diagrams of the Torch. These diagrams are more or less real-time, so you can see them change and get additional representations of the Torch's results. The difference is even bigger for Spectral Scan. Spectral Scan is not implemented in Winbox in the graphical part, so it's only running on the command line interface. And I believe a lot of customers are either not comfortable with CLI or it's just too complicated for them to interpret the results. It's important to stress that spectral scans are not working with all types of Wi-Fi chipsets right now. So the legacy chipsets or the AC chipsets are not working. But for the N-type chipsets, for example, you can get very decent readings within the Dude, more like a standard spectrum analyzer software. And a very big difference is that you can run multiple scans or multiple spectral scans at the same time. So you can have a view of different areas of your network in terms of RF environment, and that can be very helpful to debug problems and to take decisions about channels, for example. Here are just some bigger graphs, so maybe you get the idea and go ahead and start to use the Dude as your spectrum analyzer or type of spectrum analyzer. And the last thing that I want to point out is labels, and from here we're going to develop some additional functionality employing labels. Actually, there are two types of labels. There are link labels and device labels, and they will show you changing almost, if you want to, real-time information about certain devices or certain links, and you can choose the refresh interval. Here, for example, is a map. It's a floor map, and we place some access points there. And I believe the Dude might be able to fill a gap in future when it comes to enterprise networks and to controller-based networks, where we have an excellent controller today from MikroTik, but we don't have a graphical representation that some of the end customers or their IT staff needs to have. And the Dude might be able to fill that. And so I wanted to show you how to use a map. And now we will see how we add dynamical informations to the labels that might be useful for such enterprise or public Wi-Fi setups. Actually, in a label, you can have three different types of information. At the very left, we don't need SNMP or no router or S function. It's simply giving you information from the Dude's menus itself. In the middle, you will see what happens when you have an SNMP or SNMP configured for a special device. It's automatically going to show you CPU and disk. And on the right-hand side, I tweaked the label a little bit to also show a router or S-based function, and that one is not depending on SNMP, so it's just depending on the user credentials, username and password for the router or S device. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this is the source code that would be needed to get that label. Usually there's nothing in that window, but you can go to the context menu, choose appearance, and then push the arrow down to get the source code of that given label. And as I just told you, it's 3 different types of informations. The first one is a variable. The second one, an SNMP function, which is being called, which is using OIDs. And the third one, a router OS function. And you can customize these labels to your will. And that's what we're going to do right now. Before you do so, you should have a look at the functions window within the Dude. There are a lot of predefined functions, and you can combine them to make up new functions and later on new probes and services. There is one that you might want to take a look at, that's ROS command, and that one will issue either a CLI command or run a script on one of your routers. So we will use ROS command now to add a new function, and that function is supposed to show the number of connected stations to an access point. From my point of view, that's quite handy if you have your network map and you can see on which of the indoor access points how many clients are connected there at that very moment. And that's an example that we will use through the rest of the presentation. In the top right image, you just see the number 2. And this is the output of the router OS command, which is printing the registration size. It's just returning a number, and we print that number in the device label. You might want to have it a bit more beautiful and add some text to it. So at the bottom right, you can see a bit longer information. 3 stations connected, that's what we added. And to do so, you need to do 2 additional things. At first, you need ROS command to get the number. If you check closely, you will see it's ending with a line break at the end, so you want to get rid of that line break using the round command. And finally, use concatenate to add the string, so you can output the complete string, 3 stations connected to your map. Usually, you will not want to have all that source code pasted into each of your labels. So it's a good idea to really create functions of them. And I would recommend to use 2 functions instead of 1. The first one just returning the number, that is the plain number of stations connected. And the second one doing all the formatting, removing the line feed, adding the string. So here are the 2 functions. And to create them, you go to the function window, use add, and simply give a name, a description, and the source code. And after you did so, you can use the function by its name, followed by round brackets, to get back the information it's supposed to give you. So for now, you can have your map, you can have a live view of how many stations are connected to each device. But if you want to use that for debugging, it would be far more interesting to get this information over the time. Not only for now, but maybe you want to know for the big conference yesterday at 8 p.m., how have been clients distributed across the access points. So that's where you want to use statistics. And to use statistics, you have to have a look at probes and services and finally charts to align them across different access points. So what you see here, actually, now it's working. What you can see here at the bottom right is we added some statistical information showing how many stations are connected to that access point over the time. You can see they come and go. It's been 6 at the very beginning, dropping to 0 at 20 to 11, and then rising again. You can have statistics in this context layer here, and you can also have it in the device's history. But to be able to plot statistics, you will need to set up a probe, and you will need to set up a service from that probe. So the function that we already developed is not sufficient to get statistical readings. Setting up the probe is not really straightforward, since probes are actually meant to do something else. We are kind of hijacking them here to make the history read the information that we want to read. So you add a new probe. In the available field, you can simply say 1 equals 1. That's not a very smooth solution, but that will mean this probe is available for any type of device. It would be nicer to write a second function checking if there is a wireless interface present or not, but let's keep it simple for now. In the error field, you will have to make sure that it's returning an empty string, because probes are meant to tell you if a service is available or not, so they will turn your icon red if something's not available, and we want to make sure it's never turning red just because, for example, there are 0 stations connected. So we have to make sure an error is never being raised. In older versions, it was sufficient to give 2 double quotes here, but now we have to be a bit more tricky, and we use an if clause saying if 1 is greater than 0, which is usually mostly true. Just give an empty string back, and that's what it does. So this probe is always available, and it's always up. So the only thing that it's really doing, the only thing that it's really doing is down here, the value it's calling the function we wrote before was registration size. And we tell it what type of units to use. It's not megabits or packets in this, or for this probe, it's stations, number of stations connected. So after you created the probe, you have to set up a service. A service is the connection between a probe and a given device. So we say for our access point, it should use this probe and create a service from that device and that probe. Once you did that, the service is constantly running the function, is constantly collecting the information, and in contrast to the label that we used at the beginning, it's not throwing the information away afterwards, but it's keeping it in its database, so we will be able to draw statistical information in the history for that probe. That is, we can look back in time and see what's the situation, how many stations have been connected, when did they come, when did they leave. And if we start to align this information for different access points, that's what I did here manually. I have 2 access points here, access point on floor 2 and on floor 1, and I took the statistical informations of both of them and aligned them in time. You can see in this pretty small example, there is 1 station flapping. It's constantly moving from 2nd floor to 1st floor and back. And while it's not of much use here, it can be very useful in bigger deployments when you want to decide where to put your access points, if you need additional ones, if you should use load balancing groups, if you want to set minimum receive levels or something like that. It could be very useful to understand over time where are stations going to. And there's one last thing I want to show you, because you can do that more nicely than to align these windows by hand. You can use charts. That's another function in the Dude. A chart will allow you to graph multiple services or the output of multiple services in one diagram. And that's what I did here for 2 access points. Here you see a chart graphing 2 access points using the service we created, using the probe we created, using the function we created. And you can clearly see there is 1 station flapping. When it leaves the access point 1, it goes to 2, and vice versa. You can do so, of course, not for 2, but you can do it, let's say, for example, for 6 or 8 access points that are in your big conference hall, and you would get a very good idea of what happened over time when 200 people rushed in, and when they finally sat down, maybe they all stick to the first access point they saw, so you can take appropriate action and also prove to your customer what happened. So while I run you through a lot of features of the Dude and gave you some ideas how you might be able to customize it, I hope you feel like giving it a try, and I hope MikroTik is starting or continuing to push development of the Dude even further. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Patrik. The Dude really is back. Do you have questions?
Hello. Do you try migration from oldest version to new version using import-export option?
No, actually not yet, because those servers that we are running for customers, they are fairly big, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. One general suggestion is to clear the log files of your old installation to make the outcome of the export file as small as possible, and then give it a try. It's actually supposed to work, but I didn't try it, at least not for a proper size. Doing imports between the new Dude, on the other hand, worked for all the tests that we did so far with the latest release candidates.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi. And what about limitation of database in size of 2 gigabyte?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The database limit was 2 gigabyte.
Was limited to gigabyte?
Yes, to 2 gigabyte. And
yes.
In the new version?
I can't answer that also. It's like we don't actually have much more information than what is available publicly. We did work with the new version a lot, and but that's a question we should direct to MikroTik, as they will be able to answer that easily.
Okay, I ask to MikroTik. Response?
Come to our table afterwards and we'll tell you more about it. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you. The impact on the network of the Dude scanning and acquiring information. So my network will be less fast because I have the Dude running, which is the throughput it needs towards the access points and devices in general.
I'm not sure if I'm getting the question. You ask what throughput you need to use these functions, or what bandwidth it will consume?
Yes, which bandwidth will Dude consume talking with devices?
Well, in general, it depends on the refresh rate that you set. If you have a problem with throughput or bandwidth being consumed, I would suggest you to use the general settings and reduce the refresh rates, for example, for the labels. But that, of course, will not give you that precise information. On the other hand, if you set it to a second, you will see this communication all the time. And it's the same for probes and services. You can set the refresh rate or the rate when they're going to be done, but it's different for services and refreshing of labels.
Okay, but we have a general I think. We have a general option to change for all devices.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
In the main settings, actually, you have. I didn't check that in the newest version, but what it's used to be is you have the main settings at the very left top. That's for the complete server. That can be superseded by the settings for a single map, and that in turn can be superseded by the settings for a label or a single probe or service.